good morning everyone, and welcome to the latest Kuits HR Breakfast Club. This is our third Breakfast Club of 2021, and today's theme of this webinar is menopause in the workplace. For those of you joining us for the first time, it's great to be introduced. My name is Tom Fairhurst. I'm Marketing Executive at Kuits, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Kuits is an award-winning commercial law firm. We operate out of Manchester City Centre. And one of the key specialisms of ours is providing expert guidance for employers and HR professionals. For those of you who have attended one of our HR breakfasts before, welcome back. It's great to see you all. We hope everyone finds today's session really informative and engaging, and I'll take you through the agenda shortly. So with us today, we have three speakers. The first of our speakers I'm delighted to introduce you to is Sally Bird. Sally is a partner in our employment team. Sally will be discussing how menopause affects women in the workplace, with key focus on its impact, the potential legal issues relating to menopause, and finally how to assist employees. We're also delighted to have two guest speakers today. So firstly, Emma Harvey. Emma is Director of Industrial Relations Strategy at Centrica PLC. Centrica are a leading energy services and solutions company who supply energy and services to over 9 million residential and business customers in the UK and Ireland through brands such as British Gas. Emma will be providing an insight into Centrica's approach to activities in the diversity inclusion space, including the menopause. And we also welcome Dr. Dan Bunstone. Dan is Cheif Medical Officer at Cheif Medical. Cheif is the UK's leading independent medical legal reporting agency and rehabilitation provider to the legal profession and insurance industry. And Dan's going to take some time to talk about the menopause from the medical perspective, including highlighting the potential symptoms and treatments. So just before we get started, just a couple more things from me in terms of taking you through today's agenda. So I'm just going to take you through in a moment some ways to connect with Kuits moving forward and a small piece of housekeeping. Then we'll go to Sally, like I said, who's going to discuss menopause in the workplace. We're then going to hear from Emma in her speaking slot, and then finally we'll hear from Dan. So just some ways to connect with us moving forward. There's some contact details there on the screen for how to engage with Kuits. A couple of things to flag. One is the Kuits website. Within that, on a regular basis, we produce insights from across all departments of the firm, including employment. So just to say, check that out. There's regular insights and updates there. And also that you can join our mailing list. So we have a regular e-bulletin that goes out with links to all our insights on that, and also a specific HR bulletin as well that you can sign up for. Also to say, we've got 3 active social media accounts. If you use any of the 3 listed there, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, please follow us. And just to say that this webinar is being recorded and will be published on YouTube either later this afternoon or tomorrow. So you'll be able to go back there and check it out. Also, our previous 6 HR breakfast webinars are on there as well, including the last one that was on returning to the office. And just finally, from me, a piece of housekeeping. So with the speakers that we've got today, the agenda is quite tight. So if you do have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A box. And if we don't get time to get to any of the questions at the end, we will follow up with you afterwards if we don't have time. There will be a follow-up email following this webinar going to you all. That'll have the contact details of all the speakers on there, a link to a feedback survey, which we'd really appreciate if you could complete, telling us what you thought of the webinar and anything you'd like to see us speak about moving forward. And there'll also be a link to sign up to our mailing list as well, the mailing list I mentioned on the previous slide. And like I said, a link to the recording of this session will also be sent separately. And obviously you're welcome to share that around colleagues and friends as well who you think might be interested in today's webinar. So that's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Sally to start today's presentations. Sally, good morning.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you this morning about a very important issue for businesses, the impact of menopause in the workplace. It certainly seems to be gaining some traction, both just in terms of broad publicity and also a rising number of tribunal claims where menopause is cited. There's an obvious link between publicity and tribunal claims, so increase in sexual harassment claims following the Me Too movement. And there is also an increase in race discrimination claims arising from Black Lives Matter. Now, menopause isn't at those levels yet in terms of claims. And really what that means is that businesses still have plenty of time to get ahead of this issue and to prepare with a view to supporting and retaining their staff. So Dr. Dan Bunstone is going to be speaking to us later in more depth on the medical issues arising from menopause. I'm just touching on this, commonly known as the change. It's part of a natural aging process for women when a woman reaches the end of the reproductive stage of her life, which sounds very depressing. 1 in 3 women have either experienced the menopause or are going through it right now in the entire population. It usually occurs between the ages of 45 and 55, but can occur earlier. Symptoms can last 4 to 8 years, but in some cases maybe longer. It's very individual, so symptoms can vary massively from one individual to another. Now look at that age group. Menopause coincides in many cases with a woman hitting the peak of her career. Perhaps having fought to reach those dizzy heights, having gone through maternity and family leave. But you know, just like maternity and family leave, menopause is a temporary phenomenon, and it isn't something that should be holding women back. Now, it's a difficult issue for many women, and many have traditionally chosen to suffer in silence. And it's surprising how widely that perception still seems to persist. According to the British Menopause Society, more than half of women feel negative about their experience of menopause, and 75% of women say that it's caused them to change their life in some way. Now here at Kuits, we are tackling this issue. So we're trying to raise awareness and to develop a policy. We're not at the stage of introducing a policy, we're trying to start a conversation at this stage. As part of this process, we've elicited views from various colleagues who are going through the menopause, and some anonymous quotes are reproduced on this slide. So, 2 that stood out to me. I received advice from a GP practice nurse saying, we usually just tell people to grit their teeth and get on with it. And another, I've never felt more uncomfortable in my own body than I do now. Now, this speaks to the fact that people suffer not only from physical symptoms, but also psychological symptoms. Now, Dan will touch on the physical and psychological symptoms later, but in terms of the workplace, loss of confidence, fatigue, poor concentration and memory loss are particular symptoms that can impact on somebody's performance. Physical symptoms such as heavy periods, hot flushes might also impact on performance or even attendance. So performance and attendance are 2 major areas where this will come through. Now, there's growing awareness of menopause. So I take, for example, the recent documentary on Channel 4, which was presented by Davina McCall, which some of you may have seen, where she offered her own personal experiences. When she turned 44, she said she felt like she was losing it. She suffered from depression, hot flushes, what she called mental fog. And I think that got a lot of attention because even celebrities tend to stay relatively quiet about menopause. Now, World Menopause Day is held every year, and this year it's being held on the 18th of October. And the purpose of that is to raise awareness. So why is menopause a business issue as opposed to supporting women just being the fair or right thing to do? That's because women in the age group 50 to 64 are the fastest growing economically active group. That's due to a rise in the state pension age and also an increase generally in life expectancy. There are 4.5 million women in that age bracket. Now, from statistics drawn from a survey conducted by Bupa and CIPD, 3 in 5 menopausal women feel negatively affected at work. And quite surprisingly, 900,000 women say that they left their jobs due to symptoms. Now, why is that? Is that a workplace culture issue? And two things seem to stand out here. Firstly, women report that workplace environments and practices make their symptoms worse. But secondly, and less obviously, it's a lack of understanding and recognition by colleagues and managers. Another business issue is that research suggests that up to 14 million work days a year could be lost related to the menopause, and that 1 in 4 menopausal women consider leaving their job. Now, women at this level have developed many years' experience, so this loss of talent is obviously something that will have a big negative impact. And this obstacle for women, this would present an obstacle for women also in taking up senior roles. So therefore it can contribute to increasing the gender pay gap, and also contribute further to the lack of diversity at board levels within institutions. So turning to the legal obligations, a failure to manage and support employees could give rise to claims of unfair dismissal and constructive dismissal. But it also gives rise to the risk of discrimination claims, which are the most feared of all claims in my experience by employers. That's because of the stigma attached to discrimination, and also the fact that awards of compensation for discrimination are uncapped or unlimited. So where does menopause fall? It isn't in its own right a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. It can fall within 3 different areas, or indeed not only one of them. In some cases it can be more than one of them. So those protected characteristics are sex, age and disability. And I'm going to be talking next about some tribunal decisions which will hopefully bring these to life. Now, sex discrimination seems to be the most obvious one to me. To treat somebody less favourably because of the menopause means you are treating somebody less favourably because of their sex. Menopause is something that only happens to women in the same way that pregnancy does. And we have pregnancy discrimination. And in cases of pregnancy discrimination, there is no need for a woman to point to a comparator to say, well, I've been less favourably treated than that male comparator. And there are calls for menopause to be treated in the same way, so that there would be no need to compare treatments. It would only be necessary to show less favourable treatment because of that reason, i.e. menopause. Age, again, it seems like an obvious one because it affects women in a particular age bracket largely, although not exclusively. And if that group are treated less favourably or subjected to a provision criterion or practice which puts them at a disadvantage when compared to other groups, then that could lead to a claim of age discrimination. Now, menopause comes at a time when women can face the onset of other age-related conditions, and also where many will have increased care responsibilities, such as for parents, where women bear a disproportionately larger share of that responsibility. So that can impact, and that can be something that relates to age. Now, disability discrimination, menopause will not automatically be a disability. Of course, it's a question of whether it satisfies the legal definition within the Equality Act, which is a physical or mental impairment, which needs to be substantial and long-term and have an impact, an adverse impact on a person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. Now, even though the English tribunals have yet to recognise symptoms of menopause as a disability in any reported case, it has been recognised as such in a case in Scotland, in the Scottish Employment Tribunal. And really, it's not difficult to see how symptoms of menopause could amount to a disability. If the symptoms can persist for on average 4 to 8 years, and clearly there are examples where the symptoms will be of sufficient severity to have an impact on your ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. I think for employers, the fact that it is still a taboo subject and something that many people choose to keep quiet about may mean that for disability claims, an employer can defend its position by saying, well, I didn't know, I didn't have knowledge, because you are required to have actual or constructive knowledge of a disability before discrimination can be found. Now, another type of discrimination where this may be prevalent is harassment, principally harassment on the grounds of sex or age, because many menopausal women say that they aren't taken seriously, that they can be the subject of unwanted comments and even jokes, which many people will find offensive, and which can amount to harassment, as we'll see in one of the tribunal claims I'm going to talk about. So looking at the cases, Merchant against BT PLC. So I've put this first because BT, obviously, a very large organisation. This was a successful claim of unfair dismissal and sex discrimination. The employee was subjected to performance management, and she suffered from menopausal symptoms. So at the final meeting held to consider whether her employment should be terminated, she presented a GP letter which referred to her menopausal symptoms. This was dismissed without any further investigation. So the manager didn't consider the impact of those issues. And this was despite BT's policy recommending that occupational health investigations take place where health issues were cited as having an impact on performance. And this manager having made such referrals in the past for other non-female related conditions. So you might wonder how the manager sought to explain this in the witness box. He said that he thought he didn't need occupational health because he had sufficient personal knowledge based on his wife's menopausal symptoms. So the tribunal found that, firstly, the failure to make any further inquiries after that GP letter was presented rendered the dismissal unfair. And it also provided grounds to shift the burden of proof to the employer to prove, to explain a non-discriminatory reason for the dismissal, which it was unable to do. And the assumptions of the manager about the employee's menopause amounted to less favourable treatment on the grounds of sex. So the employee was successful in that case. The second case, again, quite interesting facts here, but this involved the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. It wasn't an employment tribunal, it was a civil court. But the employee in this case was a court officer who had 20 years service. She was suffering from symptoms including confusion, anemia, lightheadedness, and also cystitis, for which she was prescribed medication, which she kept in a pencil case. During a court session, she left the pencil case, she left the court to use the toilet. And when she returned, she noticed that the pencil case was open and noticed that the litigant was drinking water from her jug. She thought that the person may have drunk her water with her medication, panicked and caused a bit of a scene. She was then suspended and she gave confused and inconsistent accounts of what had happened. No account was taken of why she may have given accounts in that way. She was dismissed for lying in her evidence and for breach of values. So this is the case where the tribunal found that she met the definition of disability, and the dismissal was unfair, both procedurally and substantively. Also, the dismissal amounted to disability discrimination because it was less favourable treatment arising out of a consequence of her disability, and it couldn't be justified. A versus Bon Marché Limited involved a female employee who successfully claimed sex discrimination and harassment. So the claimant's manager changed his attitude when she started going through the menopause. He would demean and humiliate her in front of staff and customers. He would often refer to her as a dinosaur and joked about her being menopausal. He also failed to make reasonable adjustments. One example of which was that he refused to change the temperature within the store when she complained that she was suffering from hot flushes. She attempted to talk about her symptoms with her manager, but that person wouldn't listen and wasn't interested. She suffered from a panic attack and depression, which caused her to be absent. And when she returned and asked for breaks to allow her to take her medication, she was told that she was pushing her luck. So she resigned and claimed constructive dismissal, sex discrimination and harassment. She was awarded £27,975 in compensation, and she wasn't a highly paid employee, and £18,000 for injury to feelings. The last case is just a case about knowledge, which I touched on earlier. So many don't speak up, and therefore an employer may say, well, we didn't know about this, so we can't be guilty of disability discrimination. And in this case, the claimant conceded that she hadn't used the word menopause, but the employer was aware that she was on medication in the form of HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, and she'd been referred to occupational health. And those matters were held to be sufficient to fix the employer with constructive knowledge of disability. So what can employers do? Emma Harvey is going to be talking to us in more detail about this. Starting a conversation. So firstly, recognise it as an issue. Statistics show that approximately only 1 in 10 employers has a menopause policy in place. So it's time for this to stop being a taboo subject, being brushed under the carpet. So developing a menopause policy and introducing it is a key step. And I say developing a policy rather than just rolling out a standard policy, thinking about the contents, consulting with staff in advance of that, and making it bespoke. There are various physical workplace adjustments that an employer could consider making. Management training, I think, is fundamental to empower managers to be able to have supportive conversations and to raise awareness through the business. To consider managing workloads to help women who are struggling with symptoms, and ensuring by the same token they aren't penalised if they do require that adjustment to their workload. So a menopause policy is the output of those discussions and those steps, and that would typically help to raise awareness by setting out details about the menopause and the employer's approach, setting out the support available and the physical adjustments that could be made. Having a menopause policy inevitably equips the employer with a good potential defence. So without saying any more, I'd like to hand over now to Emma Harvey, who's Director of Industrial Relations Strategy at Centrica PLC, who'll be sharing some excellent expert insights into the steps that Centrica have taken to address this issue. Thank you.
Sally, thank you. So hello everybody. So as Tom said in his intro, I work for Centrica, and you'll know us probably better by some of our brand names, so British Gas, Hive. We're a diverse group of companies. We have over 20,000 employees sort of worldwide, so predominantly in the UK, some in North America and Europe. And we've already got quite a diverse workforce. So we've got colleagues of mine will be out in the field today in our British Gas vans, so you'll see, helping people out with their boilers. And we also have colleagues at the moment out in the North Sea on our rough gas platform. So really big organisation and lots of different people, different colleagues making up our community. So Kuits invited me along today just to share some of the stuff that we've been doing in diversity and inclusion space, and this doesn't include menopause. This is more of the kind of softer activities that we've been doing. This by no stretch represents what the group does in its totality. These are just things that I thought you might find interesting to hear a little about. So, so in terms of D&I, we're facing into, for menopause, particularly the 18th of October, so World Menopause Day. So we're gearing up for some events around that within Centrica at the moment. And I'm just going to talk to you a little about some of the other stuff that we've got sat around that and in D&I generally. And I want to just pick up, actually, I'll start my little section by just recalling a bit of a conversation I had with our D&I lead at the start of this week. And she sort of talked about diversity and inclusion, that we've almost got the cart before the horse, and we talk about it in those terms. So we see diversity as the aspect that you can mandate for, you can legislate for, you can have a policy, but actually it's the inclusion bit which is desperately important in this space, and that includes menopause. So when we're talking about inclusion, it's about the behaviours that we all demonstrate. And it's about awareness, it's not being blinkered, it's about being really curious and being brave, and particularly in the space of menopause, which is still sadly a slightly taboo subject in the workplace. You know, that resonates, and I think that's quite a good takeaway. And if you have the inclusion piece sorted, so in our strategy, part of our long-term goal is that we have inclusion as part of our DNA as an organisation. So it's not a second thought, it's not a tick box, it's actually just something we do day to day. It's part of how we operate our business. And what we want to do is ensure that the 9 million customers that Tom mentioned in his intro, we actually represent them in terms of our diversity in our organisation, and we reflect the diversity in that customer base, and that makes good commercial sense for us to do it. So in terms of those conversations, I draw from what Sally said there in terms of conversations are key. A lot of the strands in terms of the stuff we do in D&I are about building awareness, building forums where people feel safe to talk about sensitive issues, being able to ask tricky questions, hard questions, and feeling safe to do that. So what I have to do is a big shout out to all my colleagues in the organisation. So we have 6 employee communities within Centrica, and I've got a little list here about what we cover off, because there's quite a few of them there. So the categories are, we have sort of gender. So under there we have the Centrica Women's Network in the UK, which I'm part of, and actually our menopause group was a spin out of that group. And we also have our colleagues over in North America with their own Women in Energy network. We also have our sexual orientation, so Spectrum, you can just see there, is our LGBTQ plus group. And we have our carers group, which is under our family community. Carers network is really important, some great work. And under disability and health and well-being, we've got groups like our fertility group. So we're kind of going into those areas and talking about issues that are really relevant to our workforce. And also our ethnicity groups. So in the UK, we have Voice, and they all do fantastic work in that space. So I think if you're trying to get the conversation going in your organisation, these are fantastic ways of doing it. All of our colleagues kind of do this alongside their day job. So it just shows sort of the level of commitment. And they do have kind of senior leadership sponsorship, which is incredibly important to get those conversations going. And what they do is lots of them will meet virtually at the moment. They'll put on awareness sessions, talk and tea, or tea and talk, got the wrong way around, where we might bring a guest in to talk about an issue such as menopause. I think we're doing that later this year. And they also actually provoke the business. So that's what they're there to do, is actually it's colleague voice. So for instance, Spectrum had a role to play in British Gas's decision to have one of our adverts, I think for the very first time, showing a same-sex couple. So it just shows you that these groups are really good work that they can do, and the conversations that they ignite within our organisation. So the other things I just wanted to pull out there is we've got lots of initiatives as our shadow board. So that's a brand new concept. So we've asked for people to apply to join our shadow board that will sit under our what we call our CLT, which is our proper board, and work with them. And we're trying to draw that from a diverse community within our workforce. And the idea there is, again, that they're to provoke, they're to provide a different view to our board in terms of the decisions that we make through a lens of diversity and inclusion. So that's a really exciting initiative that we've got going on. Sally has just mentioned policy. So just in terms of menopause policy, we're also not there yet. We don't have a policy in place. It's something that we're considering. But the focus very much in terms of the menopause group itself, I've put up their statement there, is about this stage awareness and sort of bringing the outside knowledge in and actually creating that sort of safe space for individuals to start to have the conversation, which is incredibly important for us. And we also have things like our D&I Learning Hub. So we're a large organisation, but we benefit from having sort of loads of know-how that we can share with colleagues. And again, all driven towards our overall D&I agenda for our group, which obviously crosses different jurisdictions. One thing I've just brought up here, which is slightly left of field, but just shows the creativity you could have in this space, is My Mum the Handyman. So Local Heroes is one of our brands, and you might have come across those if you're looking for a tradesperson. So what they've done is, in conjunction with children's author Ros Asquith, has produced this book And it's about breaking down stereotypes, certainly in the energy industry, in the trade industry, the typical things you might think of. And I just think it's fantastic. If anybody's interested, you can download this little book if you go to our local heroes site, or I can provide you with the link. And I'm just highlighting it because I think it's just stuff you can really think outside the box of this stuff and do something really different, which engages, you know, the workforce around diversity and inclusion and thinking differently about sort of whether it's menopause or whether it's diversity in another way. So I think the other thing I wanted to mention, my little thing is hidden there, is allies. So I've just put a little box there, a little bubble, mentoring allies. So we make or do quite a lot of investment in our mentoring programs. So we have reverse mentoring. So our chief executive is mentored by one of our employees who's in a different part of the organisation. The allies framework is incredibly important in this space. So if I tell you what that's about, in our Centrica Women's Network, that movement, the discussions, the forums are not just for women. And actually what we try and do is bring male colleagues into that environment and that discussion. And they are allies, I want to call them ambassadors for the cause. And that's all about this, I suppose, our desire to make inclusion everybody's issue. So it's not just my issue because I'm a perimenopausal woman, therefore Emma should be doing X, Y, Z. It's actually something that other colleagues should have an awareness of. And I think the ally program, I think that's something that you do, maybe you do in your organisations already or you're interested in. That's really powerful. And particularly when we're having sort of discussions, we're trying to encourage awareness. I think that's another really fantastic tool that's quite easy to sort of put into place and to get going. And I think I've probably covered off all of the things that we've got. So as I said, this isn't everything that Centrica does, but hopefully it just gives you maybe some food for thought. Hopefully there are things that you may already be doing in your business, but I think they're as relevant to things like menopause as they are to other diversity and inclusion issues. I think Sally's mentioned, you know, menopause is still a taboo. It's still uncomfortable. I have personal experience of menopause, and I know my journey on it is made much easier because of my manager. And that's the issue. It's often down to the individual that you're dealing with. So we really need to kind of engage our workforces in the workplace. So it's not uncomfortable. It's not a taboo. People don't feel awkward talking about it. It is a thing. It's a reality for lots of women in the workplace. So I would just encourage, there's loads of really good stuff you can do. I think we're helped by the likes of Davina McCall sort of stepping out into the public arena and doing her fantastic programme, which we've shared internally with our groups to make people have seen it. And I hope that's the start of a bit of a movement on this, that maybe this is the final taboo within the workplace that we managed to sort of move past. And, you know, it's all about, in my space, having conversations, and the right conversations, and making sure that colleagues feel safe to do that and to raise issues. So I think, Tom, that's it from me. It's a bit of a canter through.
Fantastic, Emma, thank you. Really appreciate that. Great presentation, and certainly plenty to think about for everybody. So thanks, Emma. So now we're going to hand over to Dr. Dan Bunstone, who's going to talk to us about the menopause from more of a medical angle. Morning, Dan.
Thanks, guys. Hi, hello, everybody. Dr. Dan Bunstone, and I'm Chief Medical Officer at Cheif Medical. I'm also Chief Medical Officer at Push Doctor, which explains why I tripped over myself there. I'm a GP in Warrington as well. I've also got my own practice. So for those who aren't northwest based, Warrington is a little town in Cheshire up here. Great, yes. So I'm going to talk today a lot more about the medical and clinical symptoms of menopause. I found myself being really struck initially by Sally's presentation around how badly that does affect individuals. And I'm left after Sally's talk, thinking that we collectively, clinically, employers, everybody just needs to do better. Menopause is going to affect 50% of us, 50%, massive, massive numbers. And if we're handling it this badly, we've got to do something about that and really got to change and make that better. And I'm really also struck by the taboo. Yeah, I mean, it is a massive taboo topic, like erectile dysfunction, like depression, like anxiety, like midlife crisis. These things are real issues that people face, debilitating issues that, of course, we don't talk about in society enough, almost sniggered behind hands. And, it becomes a point of ridicule rather than a really debilitating issue. So yeah, this is something we've got to do better with. So that's the call to arms. As Sally talked about, it does affect a really large spread of age groups. I'm going to be slightly more pessimistic than Sally was and suggest it's going to be early 40s to late 50s. So actually a significant spread of working life. And as Sally alluded to earlier on, if you've also had maternity leave too, there's a strong chance a significant part of your working life is affected by, and pardon me if I call this women's issues, I don't mean that derogatory. The reality is this is where things sit, so either maternity or menopause. As we'll go into later, the symptoms, period irregularity probably is the thing that comes on first, but actually do your periods get heavier or lighter, shorter or longer? That's the difficult bit. Actually, you could be in a situation where your periods are lighter and shorter, so that might be perceived as a benefit, or actually much heavier, last much longer, come on more frequently, and really affect your life and your ability to function during the month. As far as time goes, how long menopause affects, the really key bit is symptoms tend to last 4 years after your last period. So what will tend to happen is you will start with some symptoms at a point in life, let's say 45. You have some of the symptoms that go with that, whether that's brain fog, whether that's hot flashes, which tend to be a fairly common part. But actually, even after your last period, the reality is that the other symptoms can last up to around 4 years after that period of time. So frankly, it's a long spell of your life that you can suffer these symptoms with. And as the point highlights below, around 10% of women can experience this for 12 years. Again, looking at it as far as working life is concerned, that's a really big impact if it affects you for that length of time. I think really importantly too, the comment below, menopause tends to be a gradual effect. So the symptoms will tend to come on gradually. They will tend to peak and they will tend to drip off at the end. If you've had something, an effect in your life that causes a sudden drop or change in hormones, so that could be hysterectomy when both ovaries are removed, some form of cancer treatment, or indeed even things for endometriosis, which is where you have deposits of wound lining around your abdomen and of course gives you very, very painful periods. Symptoms tend to be significantly worse. They tend to hit you like a train, which everything kind of comes at once and affects you really, really badly. So it's those kind of patients, employees, however I phrase this, I would call them patients, of course, or people that you need to have the most concern for, because they could have the really significant symptoms that last for a long period of time. I'm going to do my Chris Whitty now, Tom. Next slide, please. So I think the really important thing about the symptoms is the common symptoms seem to be things like hot flushes, potentially mood swings, but hot flushes, night sweats seem to be the mainstay of the treatment there. The reason why I've put that picture there on the right-hand side is that there are a complete myriad of symptoms. And actually, as somebody who would suffer the menopause, you may suffer 1, 2, or all 34 of those at different times and at different stages and throughout the month. So, the reality is that hot flushes, as I said, and night sweats tend to be a really common symptom. But actually, you could get all of those things. And the really fascinating and indeed debilitating thing about menopause is it doesn't just affect one area. So, of course, you will get physical symptoms and psychological symptoms too. And of course, you can look at those, none of those things I would want, but of course, the combination of all that come on and go and move across the month is pretty horrendous, really. That makes management pretty tricky. We'll move on to treatments again in a second, but actually, when you look at the things you're trying to manage there, it's a really difficult combination. So you could have one woman who is suffering with, let's say, breast tenderness and dry skin, which will affect in a certain kind of way. Somebody else who is experiencing mood swings, brain fog, loss of libido, arguing with her partner as a direct result of that, fatigue and insomnia. And you can see how that would affect her in a completely different way. It's about understanding that. It's about trying to support, and it's also about recognizing the best way to deal with that. As I alluded to before, the really important thing is these symptoms are quite hard to spot. They tend to come on insidiously. You don't wake up one day and think, my God, I've got menopause. You will have things like the bloating might be not quite obvious from the first moment, the difficulty in focusing, the brain fog. You know, you might just think you've had a bit of an infection, etc., etc. That's why you're not feeling quite on form today, had a bad night's sleep, etc. So it's quite hard to spot the symptoms. And of course, as a result of that, it's quite hard to manage them. My experience in helping and supporting patients who are going through the more ethereal symptoms, and by that I mean things like brain fog. You know, if I come in saying I've got a headache, it's easy to solve that because, of course, you take some paracetamol, the headache goes away. That's very linear, and of course, there's a lot more to it. But brain fog's a really difficult one. How do you describe that to your manager? You go and say, well, actually, I don't feel particularly well today. You might not want to talk about those situations. And frankly, as we talked about before, the taboo about it all, about, you know, loss of libido, arguing with your partner, breast tenderness, there's things in there that you might not want to be discussing with your team or bringing up. It's things you would want to deal with privately, probably. We need to get away from that, but that's the world we live in at present. Thanks, Tom. So what I've done here is I've split the potential treatment up into pharmacological and non-pharmacological. So basically things you can probably buy over the counter and lifestyle changes that you can do yourself versus medication that you may be prescribed by a GP. I won't go through them all in detail, of course. We will share the slide pack. What is very interesting is if you look at them all, the evidence around the non-pharmacological treatments is weak at best. Some of them, CBT and hypnosis, aim to recognize the symptoms are there, but you deal with them in a better way. I guess the point about all that is it's recognize the symptoms are hard to treat in a myriad of symptoms, but it gives you a better way of dealing with them. Some things just don't work at all, and some things are frankly pretty dangerous. So things like red clover and soy, which is freely available from health food shops, and black cohosh for that matter, people would always say, yeah, go to the health food shop, try and take these, it will make you better. Actually, evidence is really very limited, and often it will make things worse and not make things better at all. Traditional Chinese medicine, of course, there's no evidence to support that. I'm interested by the diet and exercise one. Interestingly, being overweight makes you more at risk of hot flushes, but bizarrely, there's little evidence to suggest that losing the weight and becoming in the normal weight zone and a normal BMI improves that situation for you, which is modestly fascinating. And of course, yeah, lifestyle. Lifestyle does help, having a good balanced diet, exercise, trying to maintain some good sleep hygiene, not drinking too much alcohol. All those good things, basically becoming a nun in the convent kind of a conversation can improve the situation, but of course might make other things worse. It's always the good things in life you're asked to cut out. If you come and see me as a doctor with a migraine, I'll say, stop chocolate, stop caffeine, stop sex. That might make things better. Great. Your headaches are gone, but your life's appreciably worse. So, Tom, next slide, please, buddy. So, things that can help. Again, I know this is a really busy slide. I put this on here as an aid memoir to help you guys, just so you've got some kind of idea about what's out there. The main box to focus on is the HRT, the hormone replacement therapy. That is the bit we know that really, really does work. It's about starting it early. It's about maintaining the treatment, and it's about helping your body to cope with that loss of hormones that's suffering, that's giving you all those negative symptoms. The beauty of hormone replacement therapy, unlike the other treatments which aim to try to combat hot flashes and mood swings, etc., hormone replacement therapy changes everything. My experience here, and of course I've not taken it, I've only dealt with patients who've had it, is they describe a complete revolution almost from tablet one. They feel better, they feel younger, they're not stressed. All that good stuff that they wanted returns back into their lives. It's a really complex conversation with your GP about what's the best form of treatment to take. I will not go into that here because, of course, you talk about bleed versus no bleed formulas. Have you had a hysterectomy, etc.? So there's a lot of complexity around that. And sadly, it's not suitable for everybody. But of course, that's a conversation with your GP. Not suitable for everybody, as I've talked about. I think HRT has been done a massive disservice by a couple of research projects that will talk about increasing risk of breast cancer and increasing risk of ovarian cancer. The reality is that prolonged treatment will increase your risk ever so slightly. So there's a slight increase and a small increase. It's not massive. And of course, that's the conversation with your GP. If your life is dreadful because of the side effects of suffering the menopause, and you think, okay, well, I will take my very modest increase in risk of ovarian cancer as a result. So you're planning for something that may never happen, but suffering a bad life for 10 years because of something that's there. That's the conversation. That's the discussion you have with your GP. It's about recognizing symptoms early, and it's about getting that support through. The other things, gabapentin and pregabalin, they're aimed specifically at helping the frequency of hot flushes. But of course, with any medication, you get side effects. So you get really hot flushes, but actually you get dizzy, weight gain, you can't sleep, and you get feeling tired and shattered. So, you really do rob Peter to pay Paul. Clonidine, again, might help with hot flushes, but the reality is, as I slide before, there's potentially 33 other symptoms to be dealing with. So you might not have your hot flushes, but my God, you've still got 33 other things going on there for yourself. And again, antidepressants too, weak evidence behind that. Ultimately, strong evidence behind HRT, and that's what we need to be considering supporting our patients with. My job, our job as clinicians, is to spot this earlier, help and support patients, and stop it being such a taboo. Get it out there, get people talking about it more, and remove it from that taboo topic that nobody dares touch on because it feels embarrassing. Women tend to be much better at talking about these sort of things than men. Men don't talk about erectile dysfunction at all. There is no bloke anywhere sat in the pub talking about his weak erections. No, that is not a thing. Women do tend to talk about this better, so you guys are on a much better footing than blokes, but there we that's something for us guys to try to move on with. Thanks, Tom. So, summary message here. I hope what I've got across is it's really complex. So for you guys in the people teams, the HR teams trying to manage this, it's really, really complex, massive amount of symptoms. No woman is the same. Hot flushes tend to be a very common thing. Mood swings do tend to be a fairly common thing, but actually recognizing the symptoms there. It's not your job to diagnose, of course, that's my job and the GP's job, but of course it's about signposting to support, signposting to teams that Emma's highlighted in her talk and all the things, all the good work that's going on there. Fluctuations in ability to work, that will change across the month. You might find week 1 brilliant, week 2 dreadful, week 3 dreadful, week 4 brilliant again. Pardon my paraphrasing of brilliant, dreadful. You understand where I'm coming from, I hope, with that inability to cope, etc. And as we talked about, effective treatments are there, not suitable for everybody, but of course there's help and support that you can get. But I think the key thing to a point is that some treatments aren't available in the NHS. So I've talked about CBT, counselling and acupuncture. If you come and see me as a GP, I know that they're there. Not all services, not all CCGs, not all NHS services supply that. So actually it might be beholden on you as employees if you've got employment assistance programs, etc. It might be worth you, investing in some CBT, acupuncture, etc. to directly support your employees. You will definitely reap the benefits as a result. So let's get talking about it. Let's move it from that taboo status and let's do the best we can to support, our colleagues to get through this really important issue. Thanks, guys. Tom, back to you.
Fantastic, Dan. Thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it. So that brings to the end the presentations for today and today's HR Breakfast webinar. Some fantastic content there. And I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking Sally, Emma and Dan for taking the time today to talk about, as everyone said, a taboo subject. Hopefully you've all taken something from that you can take back to your businesses, something you take back to your personal lives as well, speak with friends and colleagues about to widen the conversation. So yeah, thanks to all the speakers this morning. And just finally for me to say, as I said earlier, there'll be a follow-up email on the back of this with a copy of the recording, a copy of the slide deck and contact details for all the speakers. Just to say the next HR Breakfast webinar will be in December. So if you signed up to our mailing list already, look out for that. You will be able to sign up straight away on the back of this call as well. We are looking also at Kuits and producing some additional content, some additional insights around menopause, certainly as we move a bit closer to World Menopause Day on October 18. So again, look out for that. Keep an eye on the Kuits website. And like I said, if you haven't signed up to our mailing list already, please do so. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for questions today because of the speakers and the packed agenda we had. If you do have any questions about anything on the back of this, like I said, we will be sharing contact details for all the speakers. Please come and talk to us if there's anything additional you want to talk about, certainly from a legal perspective at Kuits. And finally, yeah, just to say thanks again to all the speakers. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Dan. We really, really appreciate your time in terms of feeding into that today. Thanks everyone again for attending. We hope you found that really, really useful. And until next time, look after yourselves and catch up soon. Thanks.